Right folks, today I'm going to be taking you through the first of the Unit 2 topics in the National 5 course, which is reproduction. So reproduction involves basically the fusion of a sex cell from the male, a sex cell from the female, fusing together. That genetic information is then combined and into one single cell, and that single cell is then able to divide and become an offspring organism. We will talk in more depth in the process of cell division in a different topic, but all we are focusing on today, there's not an awful lot of information in the reproduction topic, is this idea of a male sex cell, which we call a gamete, and a female sex cell, also called a gamete, fusing together to give us this fertilised cell. Now, you may or may not know at this point in time that every single cell in our body contains 2 sets of chromosomes. What happens is we inherit, with a small number of exceptions, but most cells, we inherit a set of chromosomes from our mum and a set of chromosomes from our dad, and it's the point of fertilisation that where those 2 sets of chromosomes combine together. So I'm going to put a diagram on the board. We're going to try and draw your attention to some of the things that you will need to know, some of the new terms you'll need to know. I'm going to go into a little bit of depth about where gametes are produced, where sex cells are produced in the plant and in the mammal, and then we're going to look in a little bit of detail at the structure and function of the sperm and the egg. Okay, so to start off with then, process of fertilisation, as I said, involves, we use the mammal for example to start with. There's our sperm cell, hopefully you'd recognise that. There's our egg cell, and these would both be referred to as gametes. So that's the male gamete. It combines with the female gamete. Now, in actual fact, we wouldn't only be saying that they combine. What we would have to make the point of saying is that what actually is happening during fertilisation is the nucleus of each of the 2 gametes are fusing together. So fusion of male and female gametes, nuclei. Now don't let that word nuclei confuse you, it's just the plural of nucleus, right? So we've got the nucleus here in the male gamete, of course it's a cell so it's got a nucleus. The female gamete sex cell has also got a nucleus, it's the fusion together of them. Now here's the most important thing about gametes, sex cells. I'm now going to move on and not call them sex cells anymore. A gamete is the same word for a sex cell, okay, it's the same, it's the term that means that. The thing about gametes is they only have one set of chromosomes. One set of chromosomes. So when the 2 sex cells fuse together and give us what in the case of a human would be a fertilised egg, it's got a combination of 2 nuclei, one from the sperm and one from the egg. There are 2 sets. So red means chromosomes. So a sperm cell has got 1 set of chromosomes, an egg cell has got 1 set of chromosomes. When the nuclei fuse together, we end up with this structure here, which our fertilised egg, which has got 2 sets of chromosomes. Now that actual word, this cell actually has a name, which is a zygote. A zygote. So 2 gametes, nuclei fuse together to give us a zygote. And there is also a term which you need to know, which describes the fact that some cells have only got 1 set of chromosomes. So all gametes, they're the only kinds of cell in the body that have only got 1 set of chromosomes. We use the word haploid, H-A-P-L-O-I-D, haploid. Of course, egg cells are haploid as well, they've only got 1 set of chromosomes, that's what that means. A zygote, on the other hand, has a combination of 1 set from the mum, 1 set from the dad. So a zygote is said to be diploid. Di meaning of course 2, so diploid, and most cells in the body are diploid. Really every cell in your body, apart from red blood cells, have 2 sets of chromosomes, with the only other exception being sex cells, gametes, which are haploid. So every single cell, the human cell in your body, the vast majority are diploid. A very small number of your sex cells are haploid, and your red blood cells have no nucleus at all. But again, we'll learn about the red blood cells in a bit more detail and why they don't have a nucleus in the future. So that's very briefly the process of fertilisation. A male haploid gamete's nucleus combines with a female haploid gamete's nucleus to form a diploid zygote. And when I use the word haploid, I refer to the fact it's 1 set of chromosomes. If I use the word diploid, I refer to the fact the cell has 2 sets of chromosomes. So hopefully that makes sense. That process stands for every organism that reproduces sexually. It wouldn't be a sperm, but we could be talking about a plant, for example, where the male sex cell is pollen and the female sex cell is called an ovule. We'll summarise that in a wee minute, but that process is exactly the same, regardless of whether we're talking about plants or animals. Okay? So this would be a point I would have thought you might want to pause this and note this down just a couple of times, or get your head around that process there, which I have spoken about. I don't want to repeat myself because you can always pause, rewind, etc., as I always say. So we'll move on, and what we're going to do is we're going to focus on some of the differences between the sex cells or the gametes that are produced in a mammal and produced in a plant. Like I said before, this thing that I'm just rubbing off, that sort of stands for every type of reproduction that occurs sexually, of course. Sexual means 2 parents. Some organisms reproduce asexually, and it would be a totally different process, but we're not going to bother with that in this video. We're only really talking about sexual reproduction where there are 2 parents. That's all sexual really means. So, types of gamete is the next thing to think about. In a plant and in an animal, or we'll go with mammal, of course we are mammals, there's a male gamete and there's a female gamete in both plants and in mammals. Now you probably would be able to tell me, and it's already been mentioned, that sperm are the male gametes, eggs or ova, as they're sometimes called, are the female gametes. In plants, I'll use a different colour, the male gamete is pollen. So when you get pollen on yourself, or you're getting it on your clothes, or it makes you sneeze or whatever, what that actually is the equivalent of plant sperm. It's not plant sperm because sperm's for mammals, but pollen is the male sex cell for plants, obviously found in the flower, which again we'll talk about in a little second. The female gamete in a plant is called an ovule. Okay, now that's the first thing you need to know about the types of gamete in plants and mammals, but you also need to know where they are produced. So again, we'll start with the mammal because I'd imagine you're more familiar with this. Sperm are produced in the testes. Testes, we wouldn't generally use the term testicles. It's not wrong, but the word testes is what you're looking for. Eggs and ova are produced in the female, of course, and the ovaries. So that's where they're produced. Pollen produced in a structure in the plant called the anther. The anther, and ovules are produced in the ovaries. And you'll see there's a connection between the structure in the female mammal and the female structure in a flower. It's the same name. Clearly it's not the same structure, but it's got the same name. So anywhere where in either plants or mammals where the female gamete is produced is referred to as an ovary. Now, in terms of structure, you should be able to point out where the ovaries and the testes are in a diagram. Now if you can't do that from first year, you'll need to go online or something and go and find a diagram and identify where the testes are and where the ovaries are, but I'd imagine the majority of you can do that. So because I'm assuming that knowledge, I'm going to get rid of the mammal bit just now. I'm just going to draw your attention to flower structure very briefly, and then we're going to finish off by looking at the structure of sperm and egg in a bit more detail, and that'll be the end of this video. There's not an awful lot to it. So I want you to imagine this is a flower that we've cut right through. There's our little sepals at the bottom, here's our petals round the outside. This is a structure found up the very centre of the flower, and we also have these kind of lollipop things sort of sticking out. And if you've ever seen a lily close up or something, in fact now I've pointed it out, you might find you'll actually notice it a bit more, but you have these stalks with a little ball of, well, basically with pollen on the end of it. That structure there is the anther, and there's usually several, so there's another one there. Okay, so that's where your pollen is produced. That's effectively the male part of the flower. It's called the anther. Now deep inside the flower you get things like the stigma, and inside here, this is really where that's where our ovules are produced, right in the very depth of the flower, and of course if that is where the ovule is produced, stands to reason that is the ovary. Right, now there is only really one, in fact probably wiser to refer to that as being the ovary, because there aren't multiple ovaries in flowers. You do get, obviously a woman and a mammal has two ovaries, whereas in the ovary is much more of a central structure to every single flower that a plant has. Okay, so that's your plant structure very briefly. Pollen are produced in the anthers, ovule are produced in the ovaries, and remember what I rubbed out, sperm are produced in the mammal, sperm are produced in the testes, and ova are produced in the ovaries. Just remember the word ovary is common to both plants and mammals. Remaining thing to talk about is just to rewind just a little bit and go back to the idea of mammalian reproduction. So that's reproduction in mammals like us. We'll look at some of the structures that a sperm cell and an egg cell have. Okay, so we just draw a sperm cell with a bit of detail. I think the most obvious thing that anybody would draw if they were drawing a sperm cell would be the tail. So that's probably the first thing to point out. Sperm cell has got a tail. What that of course allows the sperm to, just check you can actually see that in the camera. What that of course allows the sperm to do is swim. So it swims toward the egg. So that's what the tail is for, to allow it to swim. What you'll also find is in the mid-body area, you will find there are lots and lots of mitochondria. Now, we have experienced enough about mitochondria, hopefully, for us to understand why that is. We have just learned that mitochondria are responsible for aerobic respiration, which generates energy. And if you're wanting this tail to swish about so much that this sperm can swim all the way up towards the eggs and the oviducts, it's going to need a lot of energy generated. So that's why you'll generally find there'll be a higher number of mitochondria. Remember, of course, that the number of sets of chromosomes, we only have one set of chromosomes in a sperm cell, because its whole job is to go and join with another sex cell, right? So it doesn't make sense for it to have two sets of chromosomes. So a sperm cell has a tail to allow it to swim, it has many mitochondria to generate lots of energy through aerobic respiration, and it's haploid. If we consider the egg for a moment, or the ova, the ova is much larger in structure for a start. It is again going to be haploid, and you'll also find it has large energy stores to allow, when the cell has been fertilised and we form a zygote, the zygote uses these energy stores or food stores and yolk stores to develop into an offspring, whether it would be a baby human, or it could be a baby chimp or a baby dog or cat or whatever. We're talking about any mammal here, of course. So to summarise then, we looked at the process of fertilisation, that is the fusion of the male and female gametes nuclei together to form a zygote. We addressed the words haploid and diploid. We then moved on to talk about sex cells and where, or gametes, try and use that word, gametes and where they're produced. So we talked about how pollen are produced in the anthers and ovules are produced in the ovary in a plant, and that sperm are produced in the testes, which you probably already knew, and ova are produced in the ovaries, and again you probably already knew that as well. We've now moved on a little bit further to talk about the structure and function of certain parts of the sperm and the egg as well. So as I said, use this video wisely. Don't just watch the whole thing once and think, oh, that was too much information. I know it was too much information. I've just put the whole of a lesson into 15 minutes. It's your job to then pause, rewind, try and take in each little bit. There will be a homework that will follow, there'll be a mind map, there'll be an essay, all the usual stuff. But this is the first of Unit 2 topics, so hopefully that all made sense. And I'll hopefully, we're obviously getting to the point where I might actually see you soon, so that would be excellent. But until then, just keep trying to attend the online lessons when possible. Remember, it's a Thursday afternoon at 5 to 3. And hopefully as many of you are online as possible. We are going to go back over this a little bit later today.